Welcome to Survival Strategies for Anyone Who Loves a Gambling Addict. Together, we'll learn to build a bubble around ourselves where peace, joy, serenity, and financial security can exist, regardless of what our gamblers choose to do and the chaos they create. This podcast is intended for mature audiences and includes topics and language that may not be suitable for young children. Listener discretion is advised. This is Jody, and thanks for joining me for another episode. I have a guest with me today. It's my husband, John, and he's going to share with us just a little bit about the first hours of his recovery. John, why don't you introduce yourself, say a little bit about yourself so people can get to know you a little bit?
Okay. My name is John H., and I am a compulsive gambler. I was introduced to gambling at a relatively early age, my early 20s. And although my gambling career was shorter than a lot of people, it did a great deal of damage in the 7 years that I was actively gambling. And it literally destroyed me, my marriage, my relationship with friends and family, and without question, I needed help.
What was your focus of gambling?
My focus on gambling was initially football because back then when I was gambling, uh, the only available gambling I could do or that I wanted to do was sports betting, and, I had a bookie that only did football. And then eventually that turned into basketball being added. I was able to gamble about 9 months out of the year between football and basketball, so my focus was solely those 2 sports.
Tell us about the final day, that day that you realized everything had come crashing down.
You know, Jody, that final day, was pretty scary. The days actually leading up to that specific day, I had reached out to a brother-in-law of mine that I thought I could borrow some money from, and I was planning a quick trip with a couple of my gambling acquaintances to go to Las Vegas. I had gotten to a place where the bookies that I was doing business with were at a place where they would not take much action from me other than very small bets, and I was in a position to where I needed to make some big bets with the hope that I was gonna get my money back. And I had borrowed a substantial amount of money from my brother-in-law and lied to him as to what that money was for and how, I was blaming financial stress on my wife at the time. And the actual day of, he wound up calling my wife and confronting her with what the heck was going on with her when she then put 2 and 2 together, turned it around, and came to the realization that I was borrowing this money so I could yet gamble one more time, or at least keep me in action so I could continue gambling, or so I thought I would be able to. And it turned out to be rather catastrophic results, which then turned into me finding the help that I actually needed. So as I continue with this portion of what took place, I wound up being confronted with her. She had our 2 children at a babysitter, and she came home, and then, she had contacted my parents, her parents, and so it was then the 6 of us at our house wanting to know just what in the world I was doing, and, I, for the very first time, started to come clean with what had actually been taking place for what turned out to be a number of years. It was it was pretty sad situation because the money I did borrow from my brother-in-law. It turned out to be a situation where, his parents, my in-laws, father-in-law, mother-in-law, were absolutely appalled that I would take advantage of somebody who was handicapped in a wheelchair and try to borrow money from in order for me to stay in action. As I reflect back on that now, it's one of those types of things where it's hard for me to believe that that person ever even existed, but when I go back and think about it, it, truly did happen as the way I am stating it. The evening progressed to where it was about 10:30 at night. Everybody was getting ready to leave, and, there was some genuine concern from my parents as well as my in-laws and wife that, was it a good idea to leave me alone? I just wanted everybody out of the house so I could think about next steps, and I didn't even know what next steps were, but, there was concern that I might be suicidal, and leading up to that specific day, which was March the 28th, 1984, there was absolutely no question that, I had had suicidal thoughts leading up to that. Fortunately, I never carried through with any of those, actually didn't really come that close to it, thank goodness. But it was at that moment where I just wanted everybody out of the house, and I wanted to be able to call my brother, who was an active participant for quite some time with me when it was football season in terms of talking every weekend about who we were gonna place a bet on and that type of thing, and he never gambled on basketball, and of course, this was at, March Madness college basketball season when all this came down, and, after everybody left and I assured them that I was gonna be okay, this was really kinda hard to digest for everybody else, but internally, I was already starting to feel some relief because for the first time, I at least started to become honest about a lot of things. Now, did I become completely honest at that very moment? There was so much to uncover and unravel that that was gonna take some time, but at least I felt somewhat relieved that it was out in the open so I could stop trying to hide it, so to speak. As soon as, they left, I called my brother, who at the time was living in Omaha, Nebraska, and, I told him what had gone on, and I think he probably knew for quite some time that I was definitely coming down with a serious gambling problem, and he decided at that point that he would share some information with me regarding a program called Gamblers Anonymous, which I had never heard of. He had asked me if I'd ever heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, and clearly I had heard of Alcoholics Anonymous because that's been a disease with meetings all over the country that were easily accessible for people that were inflicted with that particular problem. In my particular case, I found that my closest meeting or meetings would be in Omaha, which was about an hour and a half drive from where I lived in Iowa. And he gave me a toll-free number that I called, and now it was between 10:30 and 11 o'clock at night, so it was late, and I had to leave a message on this toll-free number, and shortly after that, I received a phone call from a gentleman, and I had told him what had been going on. He was a great listener. He had plenty to say that made me feel at ease because I was finally talking to someone that clearly understood what I had been going through because he was a compulsive gambler himself. with a number of years of sobriety that really helped me get through that night. In fact, we spoke pretty much that entire night until the next morning when it was time for me to go to work, and I was desperate. Um, I didn't realize at that very moment how desperate I was emotionally. I was so fixated on the financial part of it, which I have now come to learn that's very common with compulsive gamblers, is that it's all about the money, when in reality, it's much, 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 much more than the financial piece. So, moving forward, there was 2 other gentlemen that were immediately introduced to me over the phone that stayed in touch with me. I wound up talking to these 3 guys religiously over the next few days, and they invited me to come down to Omaha and, go over my finances, which was pretty irregular in the world of Gamblers Anonymous. Those that have some clean time under their belt and are willing to help others would put together what they called a pressure relief program, where we would literally sit down and talk about all the pressures that one would be feeling having coming out of a gambling career and trying to enter some sort of sense of reality or normalness. And the only thing I could think of was the money side of it. I wasn't even focused at all on what else was going to be involved. I wound up meeting these guys on Friday night, which was the 30th of March, 1984. And we stayed up for several hours. I had given them a list of my creditors, and I was very forthcoming in including each and every credit card, everybody I owed money to, and we talked at great lengths about that. And I was truly under the impression they would figure out a way how I could maybe make some kind of a loan come to fruition that I would be able to just be able to pay off on a monthly basis. And I found out quickly that I was going to have to call all my creditors, come clean with who I am, what I am, and that there would be a plan in place for me to pay these people back. And if I've said this once, I've probably said it 100 times. The very first phone call I made, I was absolutely scared to death that it was going to go very badly. And sometimes you go through life and the thing that you're the most fearful of turns out to be the easiest thing to face once you decide to face it. So, after having to call, I don't know how many different creditors, probably 10 to 12, I don't know, somewhere in that neighborhood, between people I'd borrowed money from and as well as, like I said, credit cards, loan companies, and I was quite shocked at how well I was treated by people when I actually, maybe for the very first time, was telling the truth. When they say the old cliche, "Truth will set you free," there's a lot to that particular phrase, and I found that out rather quickly. Once I was able to get it down to exactly what was owed and get a payment plan in place, I had my finances turned over to my parents. In other words, they kept my checkbook. I would go over to their house once a week. I would write out the checks, pay the bills that needed to be paid, and I would walk away with a few dollars worth of allowance to get me through until the next payday. That's how I lived for a substantial amount of time. But that very first night, going back to the 31st, um, probably one of the scariest nights I had ever faced in terms of consequences. My wife walked out that night and she made it perfectly clear there was absolutely no hope for any reconciliation whatsoever. that I had done enough damage to her and her family that, she just didn't wanna have anything to do with me anymore. And, the crazy part of it is when you're a compulsive gambler or you're probably involved in any kind of an addiction, when you start working a program, even though I was literally just days into the program, you get the feeling that or the mindset that you should just automatically be forgiven. That, "Look at me, I'm doing something to right the ship, and I would like to believe that, now everything's gonna be fine. We can move forward, we can work things out," and that's not true. And I've definitely come to that realization that when you spend as much time as I did thinking about nothing but gambling and the harm that I did over that 6, 7-year period of time to people around me, the idea of being forgiven in a matter of minutes does not match up with the years of damage that I had actually imposed on, people that I was supposed to care about and love. And so that's kinda where it's at up to that point.
Okay, so let's go back to that first night with your parents, her parents in your house. Talk to me a little bit about how important the role of having support in that moment was to you.
Well, the first thing that I would say is that my parents were deeply hurt, tremendously disappointed, but they were definitely in my corner in the sense that they could see that I needed help. Whatever that looked like, whatever it would be, my parents were very hurt, very disappointed, my mother crying, I'm pretty sure my dad probably was too, but I was really, really just kinda looking at my mom and just seeing how much I was hurting her at that moment, and my in-laws, my father-in-law, mother-in-law my mother-in-law didn't speak a whole lot as I recall, but my father-in-law had a lot to say, and he kept referring to their son, the brother-in-law of mine that I was borrowing money from, um, kept going over and over and over how I could do that to him. And I actually had really, really good relationship with my mother-in-law and father-in-law. In fact, I would go so far as to say that they were probably very surprised at what had actually been going on. I think that because when I was gambling and in action, there were a lot of those times where I'd have to sneak off and find a phone. There were no cell phones, so it wasn't as easy as one might think, where I needed to be able to have access to a phone and nobody around me to where I could be able to place my bets, whether it was at my house, whether it was at their house. I had to place a bet every day of the week. So when I say they were completely surprised, I think they probably sensed that there was something that wasn't quite right about me. And I would say that it's likely that my wife at the time had shared some information with them. To what degree, I really don't know, and to this day still don't know. But I still think that as much as they liked me and how good our relationship was, they were pretty shocked that I was trying to pull off this what I call a heist, basically stealing money from a brother-in-law because I don't know if I would have ever been able to pay it off anyway. But I, uh, I would say the support was there right away from my parents. After I started working the program, I did see my father-in-law and mother-in-law, uh, a few times, the first year after I had stopped gambling, and they were always cordial to me, and they were always kind of wondering as to how I was doing. Now, whether or not they actually saw any kind of a change in me, they probably did, but certainly there wouldn't be any trust there for any length of time, uh, because of what I had done to their son and how it infected the rest of the siblings as well as them. It, uh, it was a painful time. And, when you put that many people through that, I was really, 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 really ready for whatever help I could get. And then the support that I got from Gamblers Anonymous in Omaha was more than just instrumental. I would say it saved my life. For basically a solid year, I was going to 3 meetings a week in Omaha. And, the great lengths that I went to gamble, driving 2.5 to 3 hours round trip for a meeting in Omaha was well worth it. I would attend a Wednesday night meeting, a Saturday afternoon meeting, a Sunday night meeting, and then I would drive home. And, I would typically spend Saturday night in Omaha. I had a sister and a brother that both lived there where, I would spend the night while, attending 2 meetings over the weekend, and that was definitely instrumental in my recovery because as I would attend meetings, I discovered very quickly that I was surrounded by a bunch of people who were going through exactly what I was going through. And what was so unique, I think, especially about my Wednesday night meeting, is that after the Wednesday night meeting, we would all go to a Perkins or a Village Inn or someplace like that, and we would just talk until, gosh, the meeting would get over at 9:30, and we may be at a Village Inn till midnight, just talking and getting to know each other and building friendships and these were good people that were unfortunately afflicted with the same thing that I found myself caught up in, which, believe me, it's weird how that even happens when you go from placing a couple of bets to before you know it, you can't get enough.
Did your parents ever loan you money after that night?
They had loaned me, a little bit of money. I mean, literally, it was more like paying my utility bills, and it was a couple $100.
Okay. What do you think would have happened to your recovery if they would have come in and just paid all of your debts off?
You know, I have thought about that over the years, and I think the likelihood of me seeing that I have a clean slate where I don't owe anybody anything, I don't wanna say I'm confident, but I'm gonna say I'm kinda confident, let's say that I would have probably started gambling again in small amounts and telling myself and anybody that would listen that I could manage it. But at the same time, I would have been lying through my teeth because I'm pretty sure that it would have just gone ahead and accelerated again. There is nothing good that comes from being bailed out usually, at least in my time in the program, it typically does not work.
And your situation at the very beginning, having someone talk you through the night, a stranger talk you through the night on the telephone and immediately link you up with two other people and look over your finances and really they immersed themselves in your situation as a support. Do you ever think about, gosh, what would have happened to me if when I called that 1-800 number, they just said, hey, go to a meeting on Wednesday?
I'm not sure I would have gone. The conversation that I had initially with Frank, and then that night he asked me if he could give my phone number to the other 2 guys. Well, there's no question. They were the 3 most important phone numbers I probably ever had at that time. I, uh, I found out I was talking to people that I didn't even know, but yet I knew them well due to what we had in common. And having a conversation with them was like just having a conversation with one of your best friends talking about a common subject. And it made me extremely comfortable. In fact, I'll go so far as to say when I got off work that Friday, because this was a Wednesday that March 28th, 1984 fell on. When I went to my first or when I met to meet these guys that Friday night, um, other than the fact that I didn't know what they looked like, it was like I had known these guys for a long time. And the fact that they went above and beyond and wanted to help me the way they did, uh, I think if Frank would have just told me, "You should really come to your first meeting on Saturday at afternoon. Here's the address. We'll see you then, and then we'll learn more about you at that point in time." I may have gone and I might not have. I really don't know, but they set the stage for me where I was extremely welcome before I even made the drive to Omaha. It was huge. I think that's a great question, Jody. Um, One that I haven't really thought of in that regard so much because it just seemed so natural when I made that phone call and then Frank called me back. It just seemed so, uh, it was just like a friend calling you back, and it meant so much.
So fast forwarding, when we started going to GA and Gam-Anon in Denver, there was a couple that really sounded a lot like your Three Musketeers in Omaha. They made phone calls, they connected with people, and at that time, there was the Perkins and Village Inn after the meeting, or people really hung around our meeting location and talked for a long time.
Yeah.
Since then,
Um,
there's been a shift, and the the shift that I see is I'm coming to the meeting, and sometimes even before the meeting's over, man, I'm out in my car. I'm out. You know what do you think caused that shift?
it seemed like everybody was more interested at that time in how the others were doing. And it became a real fraternity of friends is what I would call it. Um, Having moved to Denver, I can say that I don't recall in the years that I've been attending GA here since April of 1991, have we had not that I don't have friends in the room because I do, but as far as, like, going out and meeting for coffee afterwards, that really hasn't taken place or materialized so much here. There are certain individuals that we have met with or I've met with on, social occasions, but it wasn't like that per se. I think that played a big part too in just me getting started because going to meeting 3 times a week and having coffee probably usually not just Wednesday, but Saturday too, and maybe even sometimes on Sunday, that really helped kinda build some friendships, and I say that because the people that were my friends were gamblers. Once they found out I wasn't gambling anymore, they quickly became just a past acquaintance, never really a friend. So the people that I had met in that room and the rooms that I attend today, are truly more the friend type people that you can build relationships on.
So the purpose of exploring this piece, when you are the spouse of a gambler or a parent of a gambler, uh, it, it's easy to accept the statement from your gambler that sounds like, "Oh, I'll get to a meeting. I can't really make it to a meeting." "Well, did you call the 1-800 number?" "No, I didn't call the 1-800 number. I went onto the website. I know where the meeting is at. I just don't have time to do it right now. I don't know how I'm gonna find the time to go to a meeting." How does that resonate with you as someone who's had the experience you've had?
You know, you can't make them go, like you stated, but it's a missed opportunity on their part to try to get yourself healthy again. And when I say healthy, I'm not talking about money specifically because we're not a bank. What I'm speaking to specifically is getting back your sanity. And once you get back on working on the sanity part of this crazy addiction, you actually begin to heal and you sense some type of normalcy that maybe you hadn't experienced for a long time. And you'd actually have to go back in the archives of your brain before you ever started gambling. And when you completely immerse yourself in gambling, it ruins your life. When you get to that place where enough's enough and you decide to immerse yourself in recovery, that is the single most important thing you can do to live the rest of your life. So when I hear people that make all the excuses, and I'll be right there in the very front row here and admit that there have been plenty of Wednesday nights over the past 40 plus years where I didn't feel like going to a meeting, but I went. And what I typically walk away from after a meeting is, man, am I glad I went tonight. Because typically there's something there's said that's being said, or I see somebody that I didn't anticipate that says something that triggers the behaviors that you want to have, not the behaviors that you have a tendency to go back to if you don't attend meetings.
And one more thing I want to touch on, and you and I touched on this in a conversation last week, because I hear constantly, not only from people who attend a Gam-Anon meeting, but also in the therapeutic community, they're really latching on to this. Well, the gambling age is getting younger and younger, and these young guys don't want to really be in a room with old people who don't know what they're going through. And I I try to combat that with, look, we've been listening to those excuses for 40 years. So it's not a new thing. But when you and I were talking last week, you reminded me that you were, what, 29 years old when your life fell apart?
I was 2 months from turning 30. Yeah.
2 months from turning 30 years old. Right now, that is our big demographic right now, is 25 to 35. When you made that phone call that first night, did you care how old the guy was on the other end of the phone?
Not at all. I can tell you right now, Jack and Mac were both in that late 50s, early 60s, twice my age. And Frank was probably in his mid 40s. And Frank, of course, was the one that I spoke to. But when I met the other two, age didn't matter to me at all. And the interesting thing about that right now is the younger generation. that are maybe in that somewhere in their 20s range and trying to navigate their way through this disease, their gambling is actually made easier because of the telephone. My gambling, I would say, was just as easy from the standpoint that at one time I had 3 different bookies, and depending on how much I owed them, if I didn't have the money to pay them from one week to another, they would actually extend me credit because they knew they had me on the hook. When a compulsive gambler is gambling on their telephone or at a casino and they run out of money, they'll find other ways to get money, whether they beg, borrow, steal. They max out their credit cards. I did that. You ever tried to use a credit card that's maxed out, see if you could get another couple $100 out of it? It doesn't happen. It was the same way in the 80s as it is today. Once you go over that limit, you're done. So you find other ways and other sources to stay in action.
Well, I would
I think
even say I y you hear it and you know it's an excuse. It's just an excuse. Uh,
agreed.
because if you're sick and you walk into a room and the person who has your medicine for you is 35, 40 years older than you don't care because you're sick.
Right.
So that's the message. And I'm really focusing on this because we hear it especially from parents. Oh, my son doesn't want to come to GA meetings because he's younger and he doesn't feel like he has anything in common. And I think to myself, "Mm, I don't know. My husband was 29 when he was in the same place your son is at 32. So I think they've got some things in common. I am I am really glad we focused on this portion because I even heard things from you today that I didn't know. I really think that there is some lessons to be learned from the experience that you had in the beginning that as a group are worthy of revisiting. So, thank you for being willing to take time out of your Saturday. And we're going to end our session here. Thanks for joining us. Have a
Thank you
great,
for having me.
all right. Bye bye. You have been listening to Survival Strategies for Anyone Who Loves a Gambling Addict, a production of Boundarywise Consulting. Receive an alert when our next episode airs by following or subscribing on your podcast platform. The thoughts, opinions, and observations of the host are drawn from over 35 years of lived experience, involvement in state and local organizations, and industry awareness, as well as meaningful connections with thousands of spouses, parents, children, siblings, and friends whose lives were impacted by someone else's gambling. You can schedule an appointment with Jody or learn more about our workshops and other services by emailing Jody, Jodi, at boundarywiseconsulting.com. Thanks for listening.